repression in China. As she puts it, quote, if people are naturally drawn to the image of human rights, to the language of democracy, to the dream of freedom, then those concepts have to be poisoned. That requires more than surveillance, more than close observation of the population, more than a political system that defends against liberal ideas. It also requires an offensive plan, a narrative that damages both the idea of democracy everywhere in the world and the tools to deliver it. Far from opposing these autocrats, Donald Trump has joined them in attacking our democracy by promoting utterly debunked claims of election fraud and orchestrating a lawless and violent campaign to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 presidential election. He has openly stated his desire to pardon criminal insurrectionists and to rule as a dictator, using government not for the common good, but to pursue his political enemies and to enrich himself and his family. As president, Donald Trump received millions of dollars from the Chinese government and state-owned companies, to say nothing of the valuable trademarks Chinese authorities rushed to grant him and his family. In exchange, he opposed sanctions against Chinese telecom companies and banks, even when they threatened our national security. He assured President Xi that sending Uyghurs to forced labor camps was, quote, exactly the right thing to do, and that violently cracking down on pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong was acting very responsibly. He even tried to cancel military exercises with Japan and South Korea because China complained about it. While Donald Trump has proclaimed that he and Xi love each other, the Biden-Harris administration has responded forcefully to the political, security, and economic challenges posed by the CCP. As Secretary Blinken put it, the U.S. relationship with China is the biggest geopolitical test of this century. The Biden administration has shored up our democratic institutions to withstand attacks from autocrats and strengthen our alliances with democracies both in Europe and the Indo-Pacific. While Trump has said he would encourage Russia to, quote, do whatever the hell they want to any NATO member country that doesn't meet spending guidelines on defense, President Biden has established AUKUS, a security pact with Australia, the UK, and the US to help sustain peace in the Indo-Pacific. Domestically, bills championed by congressional Democrats and signed into law by President Biden, including the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the CHIPS and Science Act, are investing in American workers and innovation, creating hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs here and establishing domestic supply chains in strategic industries. These are big wins, not just for our economy, but for our national security. President Trump has idolized and emulated dictators like Xi and Putin and worked to move our country towards authoritarianism and away from democracy and the rule of law. In stark contrast, the Biden-Harris administration recognizes that the key to outcompeting the People's Republic of China lies in defending the extraordinary journey of American democracy, the enduring strength of our international relationships, and the revitalization of our economic competitiveness. I look forward to exploring these themes with our expert witnesses, including our distinguished former colleague, Tom Malinowski. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I'm pleased to introduce our witnesses today. All witnesses are testifying in their personal capacities. Mary Kissel, did I pronounce that right? Kissel. Hey, okay. Is the Executive Vice President and Senior Policy Advisor at a financial services firm where she provides advice on macroeconomic trends and geopolitical risk. Prior to this role, she served as the Senior Advisor to the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. Before joining the State Department, Ms. Kissel spent 14 years on the Wall Street Journal editorial board as Chief Foreign Policy Commentator in New York and editorial page editor for Asia Pacific, based in Hong Kong. Captain James Fanell is a retired U.S. Navy captain. He worked as a naval intelligence officer specializing in Indo-Pacific affairs for almost 30 years. Most recently, he served as the Director of Intelligence and Information Operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Throughout his career in the Navy, he served in an unprecedented series of afloat and offshore, ashore assignments focused on China. He was also a founding member of the Committee on Present Danger China. He is currently a government fellow with the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Erik Betel is a former U.S. Executive Director at the World Bank, where he participated in the analysis and development of over $100 billion of capital in the developing world. He is currently a partner at a venture capital fund focused on maritime sustainability. Prior to these roles, Mr. Betel worked as an investment banker and private equity professional focused on developing markets and served as managing partner of Sino-Latin Capital, and Managing Director of China Vest in Shanghai, China. Former Congressman Malinowski served 2 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives on behalf of New Jersey's 7th Congressional District. While in Congress, he was Vice Chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure and Homeland Security Committees. Since leaving Congress, he has been a senior fellow at the John McCain Institute and serves on the boards of Radio Free Europe and Refugees International. Prior to Congress, he served as President Obama's Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, among other roles. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and you all may take a seat. We appreciate you being here today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witnesses that we have read your written statement and will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statement to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes have expired, and we'd ask that you please wrap up. I now want to recognize Ms. Kissel for her opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, distinguished members, I'm honored to testify today on the Chinese Communist Party's influence operations and their impact on the Department of State. As former senior advisor to the Secretary, I was one of the few officials who worked across all bureaus and with many of our missions abroad. I saw firsthand China's vast influence operations and why they are a threat to our national security. Xi Jinping has accelerated China's influence operations via expansion and empowerment of the United Front Work Department and other party state apparatuses. Often, these operations seem innocuous and like even friendly exchanges. Sister city agreements, business chamber meetings, think tank conferences, and interviews with Chinese propaganda outlets, to name a few, are all opportunities for gray zone influence operations. Many of these activities are legal under current U.S. law. The Chinese party state targets our diplomats most obviously by attempting to soften their views of its totalitarian regime through formal state-to-state engagement, giving the impression of productive work. Unfortunately, talking to party officials isn't the same as talking to our democratic allies. Beijing uses these exchanges to give itself breathing room to further China's foreign policy priorities and to distract us from the regime's economic coercion, gross human rights violations against the Chinese people, the People's Liberation Army's accelerating militarization, and many other transgressions. This is why our diplomats must always prioritize tracking what China does rather than what its officials say. The Xi regime regularly conducts influence operations within our own borders, because we, as a democratic society, allow party officials freedom of movement and speech that no ordinary Chinese citizen enjoys at home. In contrast, our diplomats must apply for advance permission to travel or meet with Chinese officials, permission that is regularly refused without explanation or recourse, and are closely surveilled and even harassed while doing normal diplomatic work. Additionally, Beijing maintains an unofficial presence in our country, often cloaked as civil society organizations or community-based organizations that ultimately report to and receive money from the party, and in some cases, instructions from China's Ministry of Public Security. We worked to correct these imbalances during the Trump administration using the tools available to the department, such as shuttering China's Houston consulate for its malign activities and reinvigorating long-standing but long-ignored restrictions on Chinese diplomats' travel. Yet we are far from achieving parity in the treatment of our diplomats. More perniciously, China has proved adept at using states' bureaucratic structure to its advantage. Our diplomats are incentivized to smooth disputes and reticent to issue frank statements that might upset their diplomatic counterparts. Different bureaus also pursue different priorities. As a result, state may provide conflicting messaging to Americans. For example, the department recently encouraged American students to study in China, but at the same time counsels Americans to, quote, reconsider travel to the country because of the risk of wrongful detentions. Educating Americans on gray zone Chinese influence operations is also deeply important for our business community. I serve as a director of 2 publicly traded companies. Few American executives and directors are aware that they, like our diplomats, are prime targets of Chinese influence operations which aim to identify prominent Americans who may now or in the future be convinced to aid Beijing in some form or fashion. The State Department should be at the forefront of America's efforts to combat CCP influence operations. Our political officers can work with allies to document and curb China's malign activities. The Consular Affairs Bureau can issue clear and complete travel warnings while using new technologies to ensure visa applicants from China are thoroughly vetted for links to China's military, intelligence, or security services. Our public diplomacy teams can proactively refute Chinese party propaganda while promoting our superior free political system. The I.O. Bureau can track and expose Chinese influence ops at the UN and other multinational bodies that receive substantial U.S. financial contributions. Here at home, the department can educate and inform subnational units of our federal system that are heavily targeted by influence operations but lack foreign policy expertise. The Economic and Business Affairs Bureau can issue regular guidance on the risks of operating in China and the benefit of diversifying supply chains. These are just a few ways states should be engaging in this fight. These efforts do not require new resources, but rather a more strategic allocation of our existing assets. In conclusion, I believe this committee's work is vital to the national interests of the United States. I'm grateful for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Captain Fanell for his opening statement.
Chair Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, and distinguished members of this committee, thank you for inviting me to testify. China's political warfare poses an existential threat to America, a threat that we've ignored for far too long. My focus today will be on how our government was so easily co-opted and deceived, as well as how senior officials ignored valid indications and warning and failed to forcefully alert decision makers. Their failure over decades undermined America's ability to build a national security strategy to defend against the PRC's ongoing political warfare. Through such tactics as elite capture, psychological warfare, deception, disinformation, and propaganda, the Chinese Communist Party misled and enculturated our government as well as other American elites. Out of fear of provoking Beijing, these elites blindly promoted the engagement strategy, which was in effect an appeasement strategy. The result, as a matter of national policy, the U.S. chose both to ignore and abet the PRC's unrestricted warfare against America. In particular, the intelligence community and the Department of Defense were deceived into buying the lie of China's peaceful rise, and thereby failed to fulfill their most basic function in our government. As a result, senior U.S. leaders unilaterally disarmed, psychologically, intellectually, militarily, despite clear evidence that the PRC's rise was anything but peaceful. These leaders failed to understand that since its inception, the Chinese Communist Party has classified America as its main enemy. They chose to ignore Beijing's clearly stated intent to defeat America first through political warfare, that is, through a protracted Maoist political struggle, as well as through the very real threat of kinetic warfare. While there were some in the government who did their job and gave warning, in general, those officers were silenced. And in a world of dangerous groupthink, these officers were ridiculed, smeared, threatened, and censored. For them, their integrity and accuracy became a career death sentence. Thus, the question to be answered by this committee should be, why did the U.S. National Security Community, specifically the IC and DoD, fail to recognize this dangerous strategic trend line? Why did they fail to give adequate warning so our government could adopt policies to stop the PRC's malignant rise? Just as has been done before, Congress must compel the IC and DoD to explain this failure. The most important steps must be to understand how it happened, and as such, Congress must demand accountability. Questions that must be answered also include, how did the PRC's political warfare organizations influence and deceive the IC and the DoD? What multiple failures occurred? Why were these failures not corrected internally? What assumptions and biases existed that colored IC and DoD reporting on China? As well as who understood the threat but was ignored or punishment for their accurate assessments? My written testimony provides 7 recommendations for you to use to address this clear and present danger. Today, I will focus on just one, that the executive branch and Congress must admit that the U.S. national security community failed. These officials inherit a post-World War II Pax Americana, a position of overwhelming military and political dominance, and they squandered it. Admission of failure is the most important first step in establishing accountability and, more importantly, fixing the problem. Finally, I remain extremely concerned that our national defense today continues to be degraded by those who favor unconstrained and unaccountable engagement with the Chinese Communist Party, despite the overwhelming evidence of the PRC's malicious intentions and their lethal capabilities. Just as America must rapidly build the platforms and weapons necessary to deter and defeat the PLA, the U.S. government must also fight the PRC's political warfare operations, which have so badly subverted America's defenses. This must be done immediately. I strongly support this committee's work and will do whatever is possible to assist you to help America acknowledge our past failures and to fight against the Chinese Communist Party's political warfare. If the Republic is to survive these attacks, we must vigorously preserve our system of individual liberty, democracy, and rule of law. If we fail, America will surely fall under the boot of an expansionist, genocidal, and totalitarian Chinese Communist Party. I thank the committee for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. And now recognize Mr. Betel for his opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, esteemed members of the Oversight Committee, I'm honored to address you today. This is a matter of critical importance, and that is China's expanding influence within multilateral institutions and the imperative that we have to address this development. Drawing from my own experience at the World Bank as the U.S. Director, I've witnessed firsthand the nuanced and strategic efforts that China has employed to enhance its presence within key international bodies. These efforts significantly impact global governance and regulations. China's concerted plans to augment its influence are evident across several pivotal organizations. For instance, China holds significant sway with the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU. This is an organization that actively helps shape the global telecommunications standards. In 2014, Zhao Holin was elected Secretary General, and he remained at the organization until 2022. During his tenure, China leveraged its influence at this organization to support companies such as Huawei and ZTE. Meanwhile, at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, they exemplify China's strategic alignment of multilateral initiatives with their domestic agenda. UNIDO was initially established to promote the industrialization of the developing world. In 2013, Chinese Communist Party member Li Yong became executive director, and during his 8-year term, China seamlessly integrated UNIDO with the Belt and Road Initiative, otherwise known as the BRI. The UNIDO endorsement not only enhanced China's credibility, but it also extended their economic and strategic reach globally, leveraging other multilateral platforms to further their national interests. The CCP's involvement in the International Civil Aviation Organization has also been concerning, particularly regarding the establishment of air navigation and safety standards. Liu Fang led the organization from 2015 to 2021. During her tenure, the ICAO came under fire for denying Taiwan access to participation in crisis coordination efforts during COVID, and then attempting to silence criticism on Twitter. China's ascendancy extends far beyond these examples. I don't have enough time to go through them. Its influence permeates other critical multilateral bodies, including the 15 principal agencies of the United Nations, where Chinese deputies hold influential positions. The implications of China's influence within these institutions are profound. They extend beyond mere representation to shaping global engagement, rules, regulations, and standards. China's involvement in the ITU, for instance, impacts global telecommunication standards, with significant ramifications for technology and innovation worldwide. Similarly, its influence at UNIDO and other international bodies reflects its efforts to align multilateral initiatives with China's foreign policy agendas, such as the Belt and Road. As China continues to assert its influence in multilateral institutions, it's imperative for the international community, including the United States, to respond effectively. Failure to address this issue could result in a significant shift in global governance dynamics. And this is going to have far-reaching effects for international cooperation, the rules-based order, and the promotion of democratic values. During my tenure at the World Bank, I observed firsthand the critical importance of maintaining the integrity and impartiality of multilateral institutions. Ensuring that these organizations serve the collective interests of the international community is paramount. We should develop a comprehensive strategy to safeguard these institutions from undue influence and ensure that they remain effective in promoting global development and stability. In conclusion, I urge the committee to recognize the urgency of addressing China's expanding influence within multilateral institutions. It's essential to develop a comprehensive strategy to safeguard the integrity, the impartiality, and the effectiveness of these organizations, so that we can ensure that they serve the collective interests of the international community. Thank you for your attention to this pressing matter.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Congressman Malinowski for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Raskin, it's great to be back with you. As we focus on America's vulnerabilities today, I'd like us to remember our strengths. America has the strongest economy in the world. China is struggling. We have allies. China has none. We're a democracy with ideas that people everywhere find attractive. China is the opposite. Everyone wants to come to America. No one wants to emigrate to China. In fact, they are losing their best and brightest people to us. All that said, a CCP-led China does pose a growing political, military, and economic threat to the United States, and CCP political warfare in America is part of that picture. But it's essential to remember what China is trying to accomplish, the ends as well as the means, which are to amplify our divisions and to create political paralysis so that we squander our strengths so that our government cannot act to meet our challenges. So how do we beat that? First, I believe that the Trump administration deserves credit for beginning to change the old paradigm of U.S.-China relations. The Biden administration rightly continued what its predecessor started, including its trade measures. But Biden added far more effective restrictions to deny China access to critical technologies, and unlike Trump, he got our European allies to join us. This kind of unity is precisely what we need to win and what CCP political warfare aims to prevent. If we want to win, we need to invest in our own industrial base, bring high-tech manufacturing back to America, and make sure that we, not China, dominate the clean energy technologies of the future. Again, exactly what the Biden administration is doing, thanks to the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, and the clean energy and science investments in the Inflation Reduction Act. Please remember this: the Chinese government explicitly opposed the CHIPS Act. It is currently suing the United States and the World Trade Organization to stop the IRA's electrical vehicle subsidies. That's how they are trying to weaken America, and it tells us all we need to know about how to strengthen America. If we want to win, we have to strengthen our security alliances. And here again, Biden has succeeded through the AUKUS partnership by defending the Philippines and the South China Sea, by bringing Japan and South Korea closer together. Remember that President Trump threatened to pull our troops out of Japan and South Korea, which would have realized the wildest fantasies of CCP strategists seeking to displace U.S. power in Asia. And President Biden has also been right to heed the advice of our friends in Taiwan by helping Ukraine. The CCP wants Putin to win in Ukraine. It was obviously happy to see the National Security Supplemental with its funding for both Taiwan and Ukraine held up for so many months. Passing that bill was another defeat for CCP political warfare. And finally, if we want to win, we have to stand up consistently for our values and for American institutions. I believe the Biden administration has done that too. And while the Trump administration sometimes tried and deserves credit for it, it was repeatedly undercut by Trump personally. You don't win a contest of ideas with the CCP under a leader who says, as President Trump did, that Xi Jinping is, quote, smart, brilliant, everything perfect, because he, quote, runs 1.4 billion people with an iron fist. And finally, please remember this. One of the goals of CCP political warfare is to discredit the United States and our democracy. I went up against them many times as a diplomat. They tried to probe every single internal weakness we had in that way. We're not going to rebut CCP propaganda about us if we have leaders in our own country who say that America's elections are rigged, that our free press is the enemy of the people, that our independent judiciary is corrupt, that we have political prisoners in America, that it is America's fault that Russia invaded Ukraine, and so on and so on. If you're a CCP propagandist trying to disparage America and you hear stuff like that, you don't have to invent your own material anymore. All you have to do is retweet the Americans who say it. Now, there's a lot the Democrats and Republicans can do together to combat CCP political warfare inside our country. I agree with much of the picture that you painted, Mr. Chairman. There's bipartisan legislation in this Congress and previous Congresses that should be taken up, that I hope we have a chance to talk about today to deal with some of those specific concerns. But above all, I hope we'll keep in mind what China wants us to do to ourselves, to stop believing and investing in our country and to stop leading the world. And then we should do the exact opposite. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Votes have just been called. There are just 2 votes, and the Speaker's office has sent out a notice that they're not going to hold these votes open as long as they have been. So we're going to recess for approximately, until approximately 10 minutes.